Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Looking around the large room, I froze in confusion. I had no idea what to do next. I watched a very beautiful woman in a pretty nurse's outfit looking around, searching for something or someone. Then, a man in a wolf costume approached her. She raised her head and smiled at him. "Joey?" she asked. He shook his head. She wasn't rude or impolite, but her disappointment was obvious. Her shoulders slumped, her head and chin dropped, and her beautiful smile disappeared. After a short conversation with the wolf, he moved on. A few minutes later, Iron Man approached her. His suit was a true technological marvel. It glowed, and lasers fired from its hands. The helmet's visor mechanically rose to reveal the wearer's face. I envied him. How I wished I had such a suit. I love Iron Man. However, when his face was revealed, the woman's disappointment became even more obvious. I scratched my head with the plastic, stylized Hessian cavalry axe that was part of my costume. I still didn't know what to do, and since my head was where my chest was usually located, it looked strange. I didn't care what it looked like. If someone thought it was strange, I could also scratch my fifth place with this axe. Besides, I'd been through so much in recent weeks that I no longer cared what I looked like. Life is too short to worry about your appearance. Things are not always what they seem. In fact, if it weren't for me and the tiny red-haired woman I was now looking at, along with another group of people who were scattered in all directions, none of these people would have been at this Halloween party. Looking at the woman again, I realized that her cute nurse outfit looked out of place. She was petite and didn't look like a typical temptress. But, as I said, things aren't always what they seem. Rebecca's body is deceiving. Yes, I know her name. I know her very well. You see, I'm the Joey she's looking for, and right now, I'm very scared and confused. Until recently, this deceptive little body was my playground. Rebecca is a natural-born redhead. She has milky skin and the freckles that go with it. She lied about her height for most of her life. When we first started dating, she told me that she was 5 feet 1 inch. Our first trip to an amusement park revealed the truth. As we approached the roller coaster, the teenager operating the ride noticed that, although Rebecca was drinking beer, she was noticeably under 5 feet. The safety line was a problem. He politely asked her how tall she was. 51, she said, squeezing my hand. "Could you come to the board, ma'am?" He asked again, polite and professional. "For what?" Rebecca asked sharply. "Ma'am, I could lose my job if I break safety rules, and I'm not sure you're tall enough," he replied nervously. People in line behind us were starting to get nervous, including Rebecca's 14-year-old niece, Collie, and her friend who had come to the park with us. "Come on, Aunt Beck," Collie said. "I want to ride the roller coaster." Rebecca walked up to the line, trying to stand on her tiptoes so it wouldn't be so noticeable. There was at least an inch of space between her head and the safety line. "You're too short. Come back next year, baby," someone muttered behind us. I knew what happened next. Rebecca was usually as quiet as a fawn, very soft and kind, but her face suddenly turned as red as her hair, and her beautiful green eyes sparkled. Then I smiled because I had seen this before. But back then, I didn't yet know how dangerous this little woman could be. "Great," she screamed. "I didn't even want to ride your damn roller coaster. Next weekend, I'm going to Cedar Point and riding some real roller coasters. Wait for us, Aunt Beck," Collie shouted as she and her friend got into the ride's trailer. She looked at me. "I'll be here when you get back, Joey," she said. "I can't go either," I said. "The equation doesn't converge." "Let me guess," she said. "Being an engineer, you calculated the weight of the cars, the speed of the slides, the diameter of the turns, and the height of the climbs and decided that it was unsafe to ride, right?" "No, everything's simpler," I answered. "Factor 1, I love you, Beck. Factor 2, we will always be together. So 1 + 1 = 2 of us on Earth." Her eyes filled with tears. I knew she hated crying in public, so I added, "Little girl." "I'm not little," she said loudly. In fact, she's 411 tall. Her thick red hair is full of waves and curls that hang almost to her waist. Sometimes I think this hair has nerves and can feel something. When we first started living together, it made me understand that, in addition to her body and heart, I also own her hair and must take care of it. This meant spending a lot of time combing it and untangling the knots when she got out of the shower. And almost every time I combed her hair, we had a night. It got to the point where our friends would tell her not to get her hair done if we were going to their house because we probably wouldn't show up. You can't tell when she's wearing clothes, but Rebecca has quite large breasts. It looks awkward on her tiny body, but they're so soft that her clothes feel like they're squeezing her. The first time I saw her without anything, I was shocked. Her fifth place is pretty too, as the room fills with happy people, some looking for a mate, and others just looking to have fun. It seems increasingly closed off. A couple of very nice women in costumes that leave little to the imagination try to get me to dance with them. Maybe later I told them. They were very kind, very drunk, and very beautiful. But I came here tonight either to clear my doubts and move on with the woman I love, or if that fails, just move on. You see, something happened to Rebecca a few days ago that made me question whether we have a future. At this point, I have more questions than answers. Not only about what happened, but also about what it means for us. Before I continue, I should say that this is not where it all started, but this is where it started for me. I know saving the world is probably important, but for me, my personal problems are the main thing. I work in a manufacturing facility in Madison Heights, Michigan. We make all kinds of parts for any company that signs a contract with us. Our only principle is to get paid. So, we make parts for General Motors one week and for the Italian company Chrysler the next. My shifts change monthly, and this month, I was supposedly working the night shift. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on whose point of view you look at it, we lost power to the entire complex 15 minutes before my shift started. After shedding a few tears over a lost night of production, I sent my crew home. As images of my favorite little redhead started dancing in my head, I jumped into my Honda and raced home. I was about 3 blocks from the house I shared with Beck when I noticed her Fusion driving through the intersection. I knew my woman, or at least I thought so, and she wasn't driving like she usually did. She was flying. Beck was a little afraid of driving, so she usually drove slowly like an old woman. Her parents died in a car accident, and she didn't get her driver's license until she was 22. I wondered why she didn't call me to tell me she was going somewhere. Then, I decided that maybe it was something urgent and she was in a hurry. I decided to follow her to find out what was going on. She stopped in front of a house that was unfamiliar to me. There were several old men standing there, looking suspicious, and she walked straight up to one of them. The 4 of them went into the house. Nothing made sense. I thought maybe these old people were her family friends or relatives, but I seemed to know all her relatives, and I didn't recognize these people. I was confused. I didn't know if I should go up to the house and knock on the door, or wait and see what happened. I didn't think she would be there long, so I decided to wait and see. After about 20 minutes, the idea occurred to me to call her. I dialed her number, and it rang for a long time until the answering machine came on. Beck didn't usually ignore my calls. I got out of the car and walked up to the house. I looked out the window and saw her with 3 or 4 dirty, disheveled old men having an intim. My fists reflexively clenched and unclenched when I saw this. My mouth dropped open in shock. The same woman who swore eternal love to me and said she didn't experiment in intimate because she was not like that, did it with God knows who. This made me angry and even more puzzled. I must admit that, at that moment, I was not thinking about the future. Watching this with horror and tears streaming down my cheeks, I began to think about my future. I suddenly realized that I no longer had one. At least, not with the woman I had recently married. I had seen enough, so I started moving away from the window. I got into the car and drove away. I drove around the city for a long time without a specific goal, just driving while my mind wandered. I drove for hours until I realized I had been driving all night. In fact, it was almost time for me to wake up. I had several decisions to make. I knew I needed to find a lawyer the next day. As much as it seemed like a good idea at the time, I began to regret marrying Beck. If we had just continued living together, I might have just left. But pressure from her family, and even my own insecurities, forced me to propose. I still remember that conversation as if it was yesterday, not almost a year ago. We were lying on the back deck of our house that we had built together. It took us several months off work because we weren't professional builders. A simple desire and many educational videos from YouTube helped us. That evening, As we lay under the stars, sharing a bottle of Dos Equis on the terrace we built ourselves, I realized that this little red-haired woman in my arms was the most important being in my universe. "Beck, will you marry me?" I asked. I don't know if it was the desperation in my voice, the thought that without any legal basis, she might ever leave, or if she too had already begun to succumb to external pressure, but she responded quickly. "Joey, I've been waiting for you to say this since the moment I first saw you," she said quietly. "In my heart, I was your wife from those very 5 minutes after we met. I love you so much that I don't think I can live without you. But if you really want to spend a lot of our money to please our relatives and feed them, yes, dear, I will marry you." I sat up and looked at her. At that moment, I was filled with such love for her that it seemed to me no one had ever felt this way about a woman in all of history. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean? I looked in her eyes and saw only love for me. But I saw something else there, and it scared the crap out of me. When I looked into my lover's eyes, for a moment, I thought I saw a fire in those big green eyes that I adored. I blinked, and it disappeared, but a chill ran down my spine. I thought I saw something I shouldn't have seen. I chalked it up to the reflection of the moon in those big, beautiful eyes. It must have been that. Yes, Beck had a temper, but there was nothing evil about her. She rarely even cursed. I put that memory away and turned my thoughts back to the car and my plans. As soon as I woke up the next afternoon to get ready for work, I would have to find myself a lawyer. I needed a very good one, and urgently. After what I just saw, I couldn't stay with her. 6 months ago, the spirits moved in the darkness of the full moon. There were many spirits here, and most of them were very old, bound to the earthly plane. Some stayed behind to look after their loved ones. Others stayed because they were filled with anger at what had happened to them while they were still alive. These spirits became stronger over time. In the spirit world, physical laws work differently. Things like anger and intention become sources of power. On this particular spring evening, a rare alignment of a certain group of stars superimposed on the full moon, making the veil between dimensions thinner than it had been in over 400 years. Someone much older than any spirits had reached from other worlds to make contact and thus establish a connection with the spirit world. However, this was only the first uncertain step in the creature's plan. "Bridget Bishop, can you hear me?" A voice rang out, sounding like the rustling of leaves on the ground. People and animals in the area reacted to the voice. A chill ran down the people's spines, and all but the bravest felt fear. Some ran, not understanding what made them do it. The brave ones prepared to fight, although there was no one around with whom they could fight. The animals, on the other hand, simply ran and kept running until they felt safe. "Bridget Bishop, you were the first victim, the most evil," the voice shouted through the space of the universe. "You were the first to die due to the sheer stupidity of the crowd and the greed of a few people. Even the spirit that the voice was trying to contact could be contacted or lured. TBA. You were the first to be unfairly put on trial for witchcraft. Check your facts," the spirit replied. "My facts are correct, dead man," the voice responded. Its mission was accomplished as soon as Bridget's vanity forced her to respond. All the creature needed was for someone, anyone, to answer its call to complete the circle and establish a connection with the spirit world. Bridget Bishop, who responded, provided this. The creature wanted to go further. Although TBA was convicted, she confessed she was sold into slavery and lived out her life in Tiba. Although not very powerful, Tiba was still a witch. Her abilities came from the teachings of her homeland and were akin to voodoo. The rustling intensified. If there were living beings nearby, it would seem to them that the wind was pronouncing words. Is it ironic, Bridget Bishop, that although you were not a witch, you were the first to die? You died because you were a very powerful woman. You, like many women in this era, knew everything except how to keep your mouth shut. The men with power and authority in your own city saw you as a threat and wanted what you had. That's why they called you a witch and took everything you created. The creature fed on the waves of anger emanating from Bridget. Your lands, where you grew such juicy fruits, are now occupied by a restaurant. The street stand where your land once was a land that should rightfully belong to your descendants. But you have no descendants, do you? Asked the creature. If you believe in the power of numbers, little witch, now is your time. 321 years have passed since you were killed. 321 is the sequence of destruction. This year, and only this year, can you undo what has been done to you? Yes, Bridget shouted. You can return everything that was taken from you. The voice hissed. Yes, yes. Bridget screamed louder. You will be able to gain a human body and walk the earth again. The voice sang joyfully. Oh yes, Bridget shouted. You can take revenge on the souls of those who did this to you. Yes, the voice responded. Yes, Bridget exclaimed in delight. But wait, the voice said softly. You're not really a witch, are you? But Bridget's essence stammered. It doesn't matter, said the voice. I can teach you what you need to know. Let's start with the fact that you need strength. Right now, you're just an angry, powerless loser. To get what you seek, you must be 1,000 times more powerful than you are now. Every spell you master will give you power. Every alliance you make will bring you help. But to make deals with the darkness, you need power. But how can I gain strength? Bridget asked. They don't gain strength, the voice answered sharply. It's not something you go out and buy like soda. The power must be seized. It needs to be snatched from those who have it, and all this time they will try to take yours. There are those who are connected to you through past events. If you appropriate their power, you will become 3 times stronger than you are now. Tuba and Giles Corey. Exactly, Bridget said, but they are just as strong as you, the voice sang. It takes several steps to gain their power. First, you need an ally on the earth plane. You need someone to act as your agent until your power grows enough to influence the physical world. I have someone in mind. Reach out your thoughts and call the one we are looking for, said the voice. Mason DL wielded the gurney into the x-ray room. We chatted about baseball with an 88-year-old man lying on a gurney. I introduced him to a technician who would take x-rays of his chest, ribs, right elbow, and hip. Bobby will take care of you, Mr. Jenkins, I told him, even as I left the room. My phone rang, and it made me smile. I pulled out my iPhone and looked at the screen. I quickly ran out of the room and headed down the corridor. I went into one of the staff break rooms to take a break. Hello? I said into the phone. I thought I was out of luck today, but now I have a none. I joked. It was a terrible pun, but I knew it would make her laugh. I seem to spend too much time in cemeteries, she replied. My heart starts beating faster when I hear the dead guy's voice. Hearing your voice makes me want my heart to beat again, I said. I love you. I don't know what you did to me, she said, piety in her voice. But I've never felt anything like this for anyone ever. I replied, I just wanted to hear your voice before we go hunting for the Neo. Piety said, where the hell are you? I asked sharply, I always worry about you when you're in the field in Canada. Honey, she answered. I heard the pleasure in her voice. This is where the woe is kept, you know. Why do you sound so damn cheerful? I asked. Because someone cares about me enough to get angry and worried when I do my job. That's cute, she chirped. But don't worry, my son. Everything sacred is on my side. Besides, I don't think there are any woes left here. No one has seen them for over 100 years. It probably won't be any worse than that werewolf we were chasing last week. It turned out that it was just a bear attacking tourists in the park for food. This bear somehow got rabies. This monster threw us from side to side and scratched us. Finally, we surrounded him on 3 sides and dealt with him. 1 point for the angry nun, I laughed. Tell Big Green that I owe her for protecting my angel. Ooh, she creaked. Do you see an angel in me? Yes, but you say it like it's good, I laughed. This is very good. I love being your angel, she said. Then you didn't read the Bible very carefully, I laughed. What do you mean? She asked. Pity. Angels are not what people imagine them to be. Every time God wanted to destroy someone, he sent an angel. So, go and deal with this when they go, and then come to me. I miss you. Even though I'm immortal, I can't wait forever. It's only been a week, she said. Rebecca's day started out terrible and got worse every hour. To begin with, I woke up and felt that no one was nearby. Our bed is a cozy one with a high headboard. She's not very big, but I always felt comfortable waking up in Joey's arms. But this time, He was as far away from me as possible on this bed. One of his legs dangled over the edge. I thought that if I just pushed him a little, he would fall to the floor. I sniffed my armpits because I couldn't remember if I had showered the night before. I smelled clean and soapy. Moreover, my skin was still slightly damp, as if I had just stepped out of the shower again. My legs felt strange, as if they had been held in an extended position for a long time. My whole body felt like I had just had a very rough night, which was strange because I had never had rough into him. I wouldn't like it. I had only been with one man before Joey, and he was an awkward young guy I met in college. The idea of letting some guy turn what should be an act of love into some brutal, fist-pounding event didn't appeal to me. I love my Joey. I love the gentle and affectionate things he does for me. At that moment, I couldn't think of anything more desirable. I reached out my hand to stroke his hair, but he pulled away in his sleep as if he was uncomfortable. I had never seen Joey react to my touch like that. He must have been having some kind of nightmare. For some reason, I felt really bad. It seemed as if I had somehow disappointed him, but I couldn't understand why. He told me he didn't want to have dinner, and then I was very tired last night. The last thing I remember was him kissing me goodnight and wrapping me in a blanket before leaving for work. He was probably upset about something that happened at work. I wondered why he was taking it out on me. When he wakes up, I will talk to him. Bridget extended her essence, as she had been taught. It was difficult in many ways at first. For most of her life, she was a typical woman of her time. She was raised in the church, taught to believe in God and fear evil. But that didn't help her. Where was her God when she was hanged? Bridget's essence touched something. It wasn't completely human, at least not anymore. The creature was much older than people like Bridget herself. It was over 100 years old and wore clothes from times long past. There was an old-fashioned hat on its head and a cane in its hand. Bridget wasn't sure, but she couldn't remember the last time she had seen someone with a cane. As she had been taught, Bridget began to probe the creature's mind. She knew what to say. After all, she and this monster had a lot in common. Both wanted revenge. The creature seemed to want revenge on the three nuns. The nuns had destroyed the creature's descendants, and it hated women for this. It also believed that if the nuns continued their actions, they would destroy more of its kind, and they might end up killing it too if it wasn't careful. These women were also supported by the church and had several magical or sacred artifacts in their possession. The creature decided that it wouldn't hurt to have its own magical support. It was willing to serve Bridget in exchange for her help in the fight against the nuns. Thus, the most unholy alliance was concluded. The creature did not know that the contract between them would be temporary at best. Bridget and the creature's plans would soon diverge, as Bridget had her own plans for one of the nuns. The next night, they began to act. Bridget reached out with her essence and found the spirit of another woman who had been convicted of witchcraft. This woman was a real witch. Her spirit told Bridget's entity that she had never done anything evil. She simply used her knowledge of herbs and plants to make ointments to treat pain in her family. Sometimes, she made such ointments for her neighbors and friends. She never worshipped the devil or believed in anything other than her Lord Jesus. Bridget laughed to herself at the woman's stupidity. Strength is strength, she thought. Bridget used sweet words to win over the woman's spirit. She promised that if the woman told her where she was buried, Bridget would take care of her grave and regularly place fresh flowers. The woman told her. Bridget relayed this information to her vampire familiar. A few minutes later, the vampire went to the unmarked grave, dug up the remains of the woman, and burned them. The ancient witch experienced such agony that she could not have imagined it when she first died. Her spirit did not go to heaven, hell, or limbo. Instead, it had been for the last 300 years simply lost in nothingness as if she had never existed. But in the process, Bridget absorbed her power. I already feel stronger, Bridget thought. 1 down, 99 to go. The voice told Bridget that in order to gain the power she needed, she would have to take it from other witches. Until this moment, Bridget had never considered herself a witch, just as the unfortunate woman whose spirit she had just destroyed had not considered herself one. I don't care what they call me, Bridget said, her voice sounding like the rustle of the wind. If burning witches gives me what I want, it'll burn them all. That night, Bridget burned 2 more weak witches. That's how it all really started. My name is Sarah Price. I'm the best at what I do. Now I am tormented by jealousy. After handling so many divorce and infidelity cases, it finally hit me. My husband, my significant other, is spending time with another woman. The worst part is that he does it in front of me. Sometimes I feel like he doesn't even understand how much it hurts me to see his face after he's been with her. He smiles that same wide smile that he used to give only to me. His eyes glow, and his smile looks like it could rip his face in half at any moment. The worst part about it all is that I love her too, but for Chris, it's all on a completely different level. They may have taken our daughter, Chara, out of my body, but she spends the rest of her time in her father's arms. Chris went from nervous newbie dad to baby expert literally overnight. At this point, I'm not even sure that he completely trusts me to take care of her. When our friends or family come to visit to see the baby, Chris literally gives them a minute-by-minute breakdown of how long they can hold her. When someone picks her up, Chris sits next to her, and after some strange number of seconds, he takes her back. I have no doubt that she will become a daddy's girl. When she cries, as soon as he takes her in his arms, she immediately calms down. Today is my first day back at work after maternity leave. Chara is 6 months old, and I brought her crib to the office. My assistant, Pam, has been hired to take care of Chara while I work on cases. She's also very computer savvy, so she can help me with information when needed. The only thing she can't do is pronounce my daughter's name correctly. She calls her Chara, pronouncing it Cha, as in cha-cha. My daughter's name is pronounced Kara, meant to combine her father's name, Chris, with mine, Sarah. As I was explaining this to Pam again, a crash came from the office next door. I ran there to see what happened. A short, fat guy was grappling with a couple of our employees who deal with the smallest matters. "Okay, who's bigger here?" I asked loudly. After a few seconds, all 3 men stopped and looked at me. "He just went crazy," said Sam Bradford, one of our junior detectives. "This idiot called my wife a woman of easy virtue," spat the short man. "I'm not going to pay a person to talk about her like that." "Sam, come to my office immediately," I said. Sam followed me. When we entered the office, Sam began to make excuses. "Mrs. Price," he called her a woman of easy virtue. "He thinks she's cheating on him and wants us to gather evidence for a divorce. And this is your first and last lesson in professional ethics, Sam," I said. "The client can call his spouse whatever he wants, but we must always be professionals. You should never, under any circumstances, call anyone offensive names. Is everything clear?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. We returned to the next office, and I invited the client to join me. I sat him down opposite me and offered him hot coffee, which he took without sugar or milk. I gave him a few minutes to calm down. He took a few sips, and I noticed the symptoms. His hands were shaking slightly. His look, body language, and movement said the same thing. This man was in shock. Even his face showed a lot. He was a man who had been used to smiling, but now only pain turned his face into a neutral mask. "Tell me your story," I said, and he began to speak. He told me about 2 people who loved each other. I was weak for such stories. In some ways, it was reminiscent of my own story with Chris. Okay, I took over. Chris and I had our problems, but after his divorce, everything felt very similar. Only in his case, for an inexplicable reason, their love faded, and it literally tore the poor man apart. Like most men, Joey didn't want to hurt his wife or leave her destitute. He just wanted to end the suffering. I agreed to take on his case. I smiled thinking about it. I usually handle weird or high-profile cases. So, for my first case back from maternity leave, I thought it would be great to handle a routine divorce case. I thought I would need several days or nights of observation to gather evidence. We might have to fake his fake trip out of town, but in a week or less, I'd have this done. Bridget, over the past few weeks, had become much stronger than she could have ever imagined. She had absorbed the spirits and powers of over 40 witches. She no longer felt remorse about it. At first, she had worried a lot about taking power from other witches and sending their souls into oblivion, but her nameless mentor explained that this was the lesser of 2 evils, and in a sense, she was even doing them a favor. They didn't serve any purpose anyway, just hanging around cemeteries and abandoned houses. Some witches had to be coaxed or tricked into giving up their final resting places. Others were so fed up with their existence that they voluntarily gave up their locations. Either way, Burning witches and absorbing their power became something she craved and loved. She liked the rush of new strength. She loved the smell of burning bones that filled the air. Plus, she was learning more and more witchcraft. She absorbed some knowledge from the witches she burned, but most of it came from the voice. She still had a few regrets. Burning Tuba and Giles Corey had been unpleasant but necessary. As a result of her recent acquisitions, she noticed that she was becoming so powerful that she could influence things in the material world. Very soon, she would no longer need the services of the vile vampire, who called himself Papa Chalu. However, she would still keep him around, partly because she needed to conserve her strength. Any impact on the material world took a lot of energy, but also because she needed to increase the power level of the witches she was going to attack next. Some of them were still alive and much more powerful than anyone she had encountered before. Some of these women and men didn't even realize they were witches. Living witches proved challenging. She had a few setbacks, but that was before she reached her current levels of power. The most humiliating failure had been with women who didn't even know they were witches. There was one terrible woman Bridget came across. She was riding in one of those huge trucks. The idiot just sat there, watching the world go by. She kept screaming and arguing with the man who was driving, but it was obvious they loved each other. Bridget realized that her irritated remarks and constant nagging were her special way of showing love. "Chance, damn it. How many times have I told you that I don't want to hear your country music?" She exploded. "Are you crazy?" The man answered. His lips hinted at a smile, and there was clearly a gleam in his eyes meant only for her. "This is not village music. This is not country music, and not even bluegrass. This is Gordon Lightfoot. If You Could Read My Mind is one of the most beautiful songs ever written," he said. "Chance, if you could read my mind, this is what you would hear. A husband who won't get intimate until his wife gets her way," she replied with a grin. She looked at him and crossed her arms over her chest. He immediately changed the radio station. "I love you too, idiot," she said, and even when she spoke to him, her hands were already reaching out to him. At that moment, I decided to try to contact her. This stupid since my attempt to make contact. I felt in her thoughts that she felt me. Of course, she took this as a headache because she didn't even know about her strength or how to use it. This scoundrel didn't even bother to respond to me. She just threw me away like spitting out a bad taste after eating something sweet. No matter how hard I tried, I could no longer penetrate her mind. She just blocked me. When I become stronger, I will take her power just like everyone else's. Then there was another woman in the South. She was at least as strong as the one in the truck, but even more confident. She called herself Savannah, and she must have been incredibly powerful. She married one of her own kind and even had children with him. This one turned out to be so strong that I couldn't even get close to her mind. I was nothing more than a mosquito bite to her. She waved me off without even noticing. I thought about sending the vampire after her. I was so angry, but since I acquired the ability to set fire to the bones of dead witches without outside help, I kept him busy with other things. The only person I came across who knew she was a witch was an older woman. Well, at least older than the other two. She was probably in her 40s. Her name was Angela, or something like that, but she knew exactly who she was and what she was doing. She cast some kind of spell that blocked me from even visual contact, let alone the ability to establish a connection. She just laughed at the thought of me wanting to take her power. So I went back to absorbing power from dead witches, but very soon I would become much stronger than everyone alive, and I would come back for these scoundrels too. In the meantime, my vampire familiar, Papa Chalu, would continue to gather allies. Sarah's story today, Chris stayed home with the baby, and I had time to observe my new target. The way Joey talked about her, I expected a supermodel. It's funny how men perceive women. Joey keeps saying how beautiful she is, but all I see is a short red-haired woman with large breasts. My cousin Savannah is much more beautiful, and my cousin Evie and my aunt Angela, she puts both of them to shame, and neither of them looks so out of proportion. It seems to me that from a male point of view, as with television, there's no such thing as too big a chest. However, when I look at her, I see a lot, but I don't see anything amazing about her. Honestly, I'm not sure she's tall enough to be allowed on a roller coaster. Poor Joey is clearly infatuated with petite redheads. Once I catch this one, he may have to head to West Virginia to find another one. There they grow like weeds. I know what I'm saying. Around 11 o'clock in the evening, Joey left for work. I saw that it was difficult for him to avoid a farewell kiss from his wife. I'm sure he's torn between his love for her and what he saw. I intend to finish this matter today and spare him any further suffering. About 20 minutes after he left, Rebecca left the house. While watching her, I noticed that something was wrong with her. I took the binoculars out of the glove compartment and focused on her face. Something definitely seemed strange about her, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I was a few houses away, but my binoculars made it easy to follow her. The main advantage of these binoculars is that they can record images directly to an SD card. When Sony first released these, everyone wondered who would pay $1,400 for something like this. Apparently, they were targeting private detectives and ornithologists. This is a highly specialized product, but since I'm in that niche, I'm excited about them. Since I was 3 houses further away than she was, she didn't pay attention to me. Even if she had noticed, she got into the car and drove out into the empty streets. When I took on this case, I asked Joey to tag her car. I turned on my iPad and opened the tracking app. Since it's linked to Google Maps, I could even get directions to her location using my electronic devices. It was much easier than trying to follow someone with their headlights off. I gave her a 3-minute head start and then followed her. Joey and Rebecca lived in a pretty nice neighborhood, but the streets we were driving along no longer seemed so pleasant. I looked at the iPad and saw that her car had stopped. I noticed her about a block away from me. The car was parked on a street with a couple of bars and a liquor store. I saw Rebecca get out of the car. I knew for sure that something was wrong with her, but I still couldn't figure out what it was. She walked a couple of blocks and stopped in front of a large electronics store. I started recording her actions without looking around to make sure no one was nearby. She picked up from the ground a large piece of stone that had fallen off the old sidewalk. The stone was clearly heavy, but her tiny hands lifted it easily. This also seemed strange to me. I'm taller than Rebecca and in great physical shape. I've worked hard over the past 6 months to get back in shape after having my baby, and I am now in the best shape of my life, but even I'm not sure I could lift this stone with one hand. Rebecca not only picked it up, but also threw it forcefully into the store window, breaking the glass and setting off the alarm. Several homeless people who were warming themselves by a burning metal barrel nearby heard the crash and the sound of the alarm and ran toward the store. Rebecca, meanwhile, calmly walked on, not looking back at the mess she had made. Some of the homeless people reached through the broken window, pulling out small items that could be quickly sold. Those who were inside grabbed boxes with larger goods. I followed Rebecca at a safe distance, hiding in the shadows so as not to be seen. 3 more homeless people followed her. I continued to record what was happening. It was obvious that Rebecca knew she was being followed. She turned into a narrow alley that ran along a residential area. One of the men patted her as they walked. She stopped in the middle of the alley. I've seen people do things I would never have expected them to do. I saw teachers and priests' wives having a night in cheap hotels. I saw 50-year-old men cheating on their wives with young girls. You never know what a person is capable of when driven by passion, but it didn't look right watching Rebecca serve 3 men in an alley. I suddenly realized that this was not a matter of passion. No illegal substances had anything to do with it. Even under their influence, people move naturally. They may not remember what they did later, but their movements remain smooth. Here, everything was different. I zoomed in with the binoculars and noticed for the first time that her eyes were too wide open. She didn't blink at all. I recorded enough footage, so I turned off the recording. Joey needed proof, not an adult film. If he saw too much footage of his wife having an intim with strangers in an alley, it might push him into doing something that I didn't want on my conscience. When she finished, she simply stood up and left, getting dressed as she went. I watched in surprise as she walked down the street without even buttoning her clothes. As she approached the next intersection, she caught the attention of another homeless man who was holding a sign asking for donations from passing drivers. He was so distracted that he dropped his sign. She took several bills from her skirt pocket. The man started to cross the street, but she stopped him with a gesture. Finally, she turned around and beckoned him with her finger. Even when she motioned for him to come, I felt something was wrong again. Her movements were too sudden, like those of a doll. When I realized what was happening, it was too late to save the man. His passion for Rebecca clouded his mind. He was so focused on her that he didn't notice anything else. As he stepped onto the road, he was hit by an SUV. The driver of the SUV had no idea that the man was about to enter the road. He slammed on the brakes, turning the 3-ton vehicle so sharply that the rear end almost lifted off the ground. But it was too late. I quickly dialed 911. There was nothing that could be done for the homeless man, but perhaps they could save the driver. He got out of the car and didn't look good. Even as I heard sirens in the distance, Rebecca walked toward me, heading back to where she came from. I ducked through the door and entered an abandoned building. As Rebecca approached me, she suddenly stopped and looked around. She let out a piercing scream, so sharp that it couldn't have come from a human throat. "I feel you there, little witch. You don't even know who you are, do you? Luckily for you, I don't have time for you right now, but let's play." I looked out from behind the door and noticed that Rebecca's mouth was open. She didn't speak. Her mouth didn't move, but the words still came out. "The next time we meet, little witch, I will burn your bones and take your power for myself. But today I'm just going to give you a little toast as a goodbye. See you soon." She shrieked again. She left, and small but hot flames began to flare up around me. Smoke rose. I rushed to the back of the room, trying to find another way out. My lungs filled with smoke, and Rebecca's voice, quieter with every step, reached me until she and whatever controlled her disappeared. Because of the smoke and darkness, I couldn't see anything. I coughed several times and struggled to breathe. Remembering that I had binoculars with infrared mode, I pointed them at the walls. The door through which I entered had disappeared. I felt myself growing weaker. Was this something that would take me away from my husband and child? I pulled out my gun and knocked on the wall until I felt wood. I kicked it several times until it gave way and then lunged at it just before I lost consciousness. Similar events were occurring across the country with alarming frequency. Several very powerful vampires had teamed up. They were joined by several werewolves who had strayed from the pack. They had never met before, had no common history, and nothing connected them to each other except that they had all recently spoken with Papa Chalou. He promised each of them something different, and they were all willing to put aside their mutual hatred and distrust in order to help Papa Chalou achieve his goals. None of them knew that Chalou's goals were not his own, and Chalou himself did not know that his mistress' goals were not really hers either. In the suburbs of Chicago, Bridget hovered above a garage. She didn't understand why she was here, but the witch living here was extremely powerful. The energy either increased or decreased, and there was a feeling that there were several sources, and they were of different frequencies. Bridget had learned a lot during her weeks of searching, but now it seemed to her that she knew nothing. The source of power seemed both alive and dead. She extended her mind into a medium-sized house and found two people, a man and a woman, sleeping inside. None of them had even a drop of magical power. Bridget screamed in frustration, and the wind responded to her disappointment. She cast her mind further, and as soon as it touched the garage over which her spirit hovered, she heard a sound so loud and ominous that it was like the slamming of the gates of hell closing. Even in her ethereal state, Bridget shuddered. Suddenly, the metal of the garage door bent outward, and a car flew out, destroying the door in the process. A bright yellow Mustang with black racing stripes sped down the road faster than Bridget could follow. Sometimes spirits become attached to objects, Bridget thought. It was obvious that a very powerful spirit was associated with the car. Bridget wanted this power, but even more, she needed to understand it. She didn't know where the car was now, but she would definitely find it. 200 or 300 miles from Chicago, but still in the Great Lakes region, a large man walked out of the manufacturing plant where he worked. The other man followed him, and they headed toward the parking lot. "Are you sure you need 3 weeks of vacation at once?" the smaller man asked. "Hell yes," the large man laughed. "I need to go back to nature for a while, dude. I don't understand you. All summer, when there was a terrible heat and everyone else took vacation, you survived. And now that the weather has cooled down and it's livable, you want to leave?" the smaller man said, shaking his head. Billy got into an old model pickup truck. The large man, whose name was John, spoke then, although there was no one around. He spoke as if there were someone there. Yes, I feel it too. Something terrible is coming. And this time it's serious, he said. As if in response to his words, the wind rose and ruffled his long black hair. It seemed as if the wind was gently caressing him. Sarah, when I woke up, not much time had passed. I realized this by the fact that the sirens were getting louder, but they weren't here yet. I stood up and dusted myself off. I looked around for Rebecca, but she had disappeared. I took out my iPhone and checked Rebecca's license plate number. She was already in the car and driving. She seemed to be heading home. I couldn't believe that the plump little red-haired housewife, whom I suspected of having an affair with the butcher or something like that, could do the things she had done. Breaking a store window is one thing, but killing a homeless man with a car was completely beyond the pale. I didn't know what to say to her husband. On one hand, something was clearly controlling her, but I didn't understand what exactly. I'd heard that people can be hypnotized into doing things, but I'd also heard that hypnosis cannot make a person do something that they would not do in normal life. Hypnosis should simply reduce their internal barriers, not turn them into murderers. Frankly, I was out of my element. This incident was too strange, even for me. I drove back to her house, just in time to see Rebecca get out of the car and walk into her house in the pre-dawn darkness. I went home and went to bed with my sleeping husband. He rolled over and hugged me, and we both fell asleep. Everything was right again in my world. Once Chris held me, nothing else mattered. Somewhere in the middle of the night, my cell phone rang. I barely realized it. I thought they would leave a message. A short time later, the home phone rang. Let them leave a message too. The next morning, I woke up and prepared breakfast for Chris and Chara. Everything was fine until I came to the office and checked my messages. I realized that my fatigue and the fact that I almost died in a fire had temporarily clouded my mind. The first message on my cell phone was from Joey. He called twice, first on my mobile, then on the office line. Sarah, this is Joey, he said in the first message. Did you find anything? Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't her. And what the hell? Hey, you're having some problems, Sarah? I'll call you back later. There's some idiot here who needs to be taught a lesson. His voice was irritated and full of confidence. The second time he called the office, he sounded scared. Sarah, I need to run. Something is chasing me. I can't go home because I don't want this thing to get close to Beck, so all I heard after there was some sounds and rumbling, and then another voice came on the phone. HM, the guy seems out of shape right now, said a voice with a Caribbean accent. Then he laughed, but the laugh sounded as if it came straight from hell. Tell it to your little wife that we will contact her, and if she wants him back. Haha, was all he said before the connection was cut off. Crap, I screamed. How can you quit this business? As strange as it was, I couldn't leave him when my client wasn't there to tell him I'd left. Even though I was the best at what I did what every woman in trouble does. I called my husband. Chris, dear, I rang. Have Pam take Chara home and lock all the doors until this is over. If they're watching you, they probably won't follow her. We'll work from your office and stay away from home so that danger doesn't follow Chara. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. How did you know? I asked. Sarah, I love you, he said. I know all your movements and moods. I could tell from your voice that we were back in business. Besides, it's been 6 months since we've had something like this. To be honest, I started to get bored. Oh, and your aunt called you last night. Chris, I love you too, I said with admiration. Come as quickly as possible. What Aunt Angie wants will have to wait until we're done with this matter. Even as I said this, I felt it was a mistake. I felt a lot better knowing that Chris would be working with me on this strange case. I also knew that I had to take the next step. I jumped in the car and drove to Joey's house, calling Chris to let him know where I was going. When I got to Joey's house, I called the number he gave me for their home phone. The phone rang about 5 times before the answering machine went off. I dialed the number again, and on the third ring, a sleepy voice answered me. Hello? She said, her voice low and husky, especially for a woman as small as she was. There was no hint of the shrill voice I had heard the night before. She sounded tired, which, considering everything she'd done, made sense. Rebecca, get dressed. I'm already on my way to you. I'm right in front of your house, I said. Who the hell is this? She asked in surprise. Do we know each other? No, we don't know each other, I answered, but have a nice day, crazy girl. She hung up, I called back immediately. Rebecca, is Joey home? I asked as soon as she picked up the phone. She hesitated. Where is he? She asked. All traces of sleepiness immediately disappeared from her voice. I suddenly felt like I had to tell her everything that was happening. As soon as I started, a voice in the back of my mind told me to shut up and clear my thoughts. We don't have much time to sort everything out, so get dressed, I said. She sighed irritably and said that she would be out on the porch in 10 minutes. My cell phone rang again, and I saw it was Aunt Angela. I let the call go to voicemail. I just didn't feel like discussing the family barbecue at the moment. I waited on the porch. A few minutes later, the door opened. Rebecca came out, clearly ready to fight. She looked me up and down, then looked at me suspiciously. I literally felt waves of anger and confusion emanating from her. I should have known, she spat. Now I'll beat you, and then I'll beat him too. Rebecca, what are you talking about again? I asked. We really don't have time for all this nonsense. You're the one who started this nonsense, she said. Even as she said this, it was clear she wasn't used to swearing, but she was clearly very angry. I couldn't understand why, but she was obviously a bundle of conflicting emotions. I chalked it up to feeling guilty about everything she had just done. It was almost cute the way her pale skin turned red and tears welled up in her eyes. She then clenched her small fists and tried to hit me. I stepped back, feeling her small hand brush past my chest, and almost laughed. Rebecca, I don't have time to be your little fifth place right now, I said confidently. Then she tried to hit me again. I will kill you, she blurted out. My Joey, you woman of easy virtue. I started laughing. The woman who went out and slept with tramps called me a woman of easy virtue. I put my hand on her forehead, like in those stoic movies, and let her hit the air. Rebecca, we don't have time for this, I said again as she vented her anger. Joey needs our help. She stopped immediately, and I swore her eyes sparkled. The next moment, I was already flying back. Rebecca was still standing there, but she was looking straight at me, and I was sure there was some kind of light hidden behind her green eyes. Okay, you long, skinny, red-haired woman of easy virtue, she spat. What the hell is going on? I asked, breathless. Strawberry blonde, I managed to croak. What are you talking about, you stupid, she hissed. I'm not a redhead, I said with difficulty. My hair is blonde with a few red strands. She looked at me as if I were an insect under a microscope. Lying, she hissed. Suddenly, I was released, and I fell onto the porch, landing awkwardly on my butt. She started laughing. What's so funny? I asked, still confused about what had just happened. Rebecca came over to me and tried to help me up. What's going on, Sarah? She asked. I didn't tell you my name, I said. She looked at me in confusion. But I think I know everything about you now, she said. I was so angry at you because I thought that with your height and beauty, I thought my Joey was cheating on me with you. She looked at me, but couldn't meet my gaze. Sorry for getting into your head. I've never done this before. I didn't know I could do this. When I'm angry, everything seems to spin out of control. I think that's why I'm so paranoid about losing Joey. Rebecca, Joey isn't cheating on you, not with me, not with anyone else, I said. Now I know that, she replied. And I know you're just as confused as I am. Sarah, I know you just gave birth to an adorable baby girl, and you love your husband too much to ever cheat on him. I even know that you lighten your hair because there are too many beautiful redheads in your family. But I still don't understand why you came here today. Rebecca, we need to talk, but first I have to get you to safety. Will you come with me to the office? I asked. Of course, she replied. Now I trust you completely. Along the way, we had a light conversation while I tried to comprehend what had happened. I was still trying to come to terms with the fact that something had been controlling the little woman next to me for most of the previous night. I didn't know how to bring this up with her now. I also had to take into account the fact that she herself had some abilities. She had somehow lifted me into the air and nearly strangled me without moving. And then she had watched my thoughts as I leafed through a magazine. When we returned to the office, Chris was already there. I knew this because his Shelby GT500 was parked in my spot. Apparently, my husband was preparing for war. If he didn't think anything was going on, he would have arrived in his regular supercharged Mustang. But if he brought the GT500, it meant he was ready for anything. As soon as we entered the office, he immediately jumped to his feet. Oh God, Rebecca said. I knew he was cute from your thoughts, but I didn't know he was this cute. Hey, Beck, we're here to figure out what happened to your husband, not for you to stare at mine, I said sharply. The door behind us suddenly opened, and 3 women ran into the room. Don't worry about her, said the eldest of the 3. She always gets angry when someone breathes near this man. The woman who spoke looked to be in her 40s, but she could have been 30. Like me, she was tall and slender. Her southern accent immediately put her at ease and made men lose their heads. Her long, thick hair hung just below her waist, and a light summer dress seemed out of place in the early autumn coolness. I think I was lucky she even wore shoes. Her smile lit up the whole room, and even my husband smiled when he saw her. Next to her stood another red-haired woman. Her hair had slight waves and curls, which gave it a lively dynamic. She didn't smile like the eldest, but carefully looked around the room, pretending she didn't notice anything special. Her jeans were freshly pressed and clearly expensive. She was as small as Rebecca, but even slimmer. No one would have guessed that she had already given birth to 2 children. It was clear from her appearance that she missed her husband, and all she could do was keep her hand away from her phone. She was wearing boots like the other 2, but hers clearly cost more than $1,000. The 3rd woman always amazed me. Her hair, the same red as the others, was cut asymmetrically. A long strand covered one eye, and a shorter part curled neatly behind her ear. She was wearing regular skinny Levi's jeans, so tight it was hard to imagine how she could even breathe, but she was breathing fine. The rise and fall was mesmerizing. She chewed gum and wore a t-shirt with some kind of giant truck on it. Her style was the most urban of them all, and the headphones dangling around her neck suggested that she would soon lose interest and become immersed in her music. One of my colleagues passing by the office took a double look at us and then walked into the room. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked. "Price, did you organize a convention of redheads?" Compared to these women, my hair stood out only because it was strawberry blonde. But Rebecca, although her hair was also red, looked paler compared to the fiery shades of the other 3 women. Damn, I thought. Her hair was just as red as ours before she started bleaching it. I said, her hoarse voice, tempered by cigarettes and beer. She probably drove crazy all the truck drivers who heard her on the radio. Unfortunately for them, she was faithful to only one thing, the one she married. "Sarah, I called you 3 or 4 times, and you didn't pick up," Aunt Angela reproached me. I gave her your messages. "Aunt Angela," my husband said cheerfully, smiling, "I was busy." "And," I answered, throwing a withering look at my husband, "I'm working on a case now. Maybe you'd better go to my house and wait for us there." "Well, wait here, honey," Angela said. A chill ran down my spine. When my aunt had premonitions, something always happened. She had started preparing me and the whole family for her wedding to Uncle Mike almost a year before they met. 6 months after she started talking about him, Mike became her son's track coach, found out his wife was cheating on him, and fell head over heels for Aunt Angela. "Just pretend we're not here," Evie said. "Maybe if we're lucky, we won't be here." I hate standing still. She reached for her headphones, but my cousin Savannah gently removed her hand. "Can we start already?" Rebecca asked. "I really don't care that your family is here. It's strange, but I feel some kind of connection." "Okay, Rebecca," I said. "At first, you thought I was having an affair with your husband, Joey. What made you think that?" Before Rebecca could respond, Evie burst out laughing. Everyone looked at her. "Come on," she blurted out. "Just listen to how stupid this sounds. Sarah won't have an affair. Before I met Chris, I thought she was a robot. I don't even think she knew she had, well, you know, what to do with it." "Okay, he'll shut up," Evie added. Rebecca began. "He's been acting different for about a week. He doesn't want me like he used to, and he's sad." "Rebecca, he loves you," I said. "He would never cheat on you, either with me or with anyone else. Especially with such bleached hair," I teased. I gave her an angry look. "Joey thought you cheated on him," I said. "I would never do that," Rebecca cried. "Never in my life. Never for anything." I turned on the recording from my binoculars on the monitor at the front of the room. Rebecca turned to look at the screen. "It's me," she said. "Why do you have a video of me?" "Just watch," I replied. We all watched the video. "I didn't do it," Rebecca said as we watched her break a store window. "It's not me." "Oh, it's you," Evie said. "I don't remember any of this," Rebecca said. A few minutes later, we got to the part where she was having a night with homeless people. My Aunt Angela turned away from the screen. Evie stepped closer to get a better look. Nobody said there would be a video for adults. She screamed, "Sarah, can I have a copy?" "Oh, wait until Chance sees this," she added. "Oh, am I talking too loud?" Rebecca started crying, and suddenly the monitor exploded. My Aunt Angela immediately came up to her and hugged her. Savannah hugged her too. "My God, what a woman of easy virtue," Evie screamed. She looked around and saw that everyone was staring at her. What? She screamed. "Am I the only one who saw this video?" "Evie, where's Chance?" I asked. "My cousin was too rude to be here when all this nonsense started," Angela said. "I convinced Greg to take him and Uncle Mike on an alligator fishing trip to Florida. That way, they will be safe from all this devilry. If only this would end already. I'm bored. Can I call Chance now?" Evie asked. "No," Angela answered sharply. "Rebecca, how long have you been a witch?" "How long have I been what?" Rebecca asked quietly, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "How long can you do what you do?" Angela asked. "Always," Rebecca answered. "But that only happens when I'm angry." "No," Angela said. "You just let it out when you're angry. It's always with you. It's part of you. We all have it. Some have more. Some have less." Savannah is starting to notice her abilities, but they aren't as strong as yours. Evie uses hers to do nasty things to women who try to pick up her husband at truck stops. Evie shrugged. "They get what they deserve," she said. "Poor Sarah doesn't even admit that she has anything special," Angela continued. "She thinks that her intuition, which helps her solve cases, is just her intellect." I didn't know what to answer to this. "Damn," Angela said suddenly. We all looked at her. My aunt was too well-mannered to say damn, even if her mouth was full of the word. "It's all part of one big plan," she continued. "Something is gathering strength out there. Some spirit or force is accumulating power. I don't know why it's doing this or what it will do when it reaches its goal. She tried to capture us all. She attacked Evie in her truck, but it didn't work because Evie is the queen in this truck. Her love for Chance, coupled with her hidden powers and absolute fearlessness in the machine, drove her away. The same thing happened with Savannah. She had a headache, and she dealt with it the way she deals with everything else." "You mean she turned Greg over and had an intimate with her?" Evie asked. "And being too loud again, huh?" she added. "When she came for me, everything was different," Angela continued. "I knew who she was and what she needed. I called these two, and when we discussed everything, we came here. We decided that if we fought, it would be from a place where our loved ones would be safe. But with Rebecca, it's different. I can't understand it. With Rebecca, it's more like a test drive." "What do you mean?" asked Angela. "When it came to the three of you, she or it wanted your strength, your abilities, your magic, or something like that. If she's building up power, she needs a place to put it when she's ready. Maybe she wanted to suck all the strength out of you and leave you to rot. But with Rebecca, she needs the host herself. Maybe she's just testing Rebecca the way my husband tests a car before he buys it. Perhaps that's why she forced Rebecca to do things she would never do, gradually gaining control. See what I mean when I talk about your abilities, Sarah?" Angela smiled. "We need a plan." "No," I said. "First, we need information. We need to find out who she is and what she needs. As soon as this becomes clear, then we'll make a plan." "I know how to get it," Angela smiled. "Capturing a body is almost the same as reading minds. It's all about concentration and strength. If Sarah is right, the spirit will try to take over Rebecca's body again tonight. We'll be with you, Rebecca, and when she tries this, you will do two things. First, you block her, and then you get a glimpse into her thoughts. These connections are always two-way. If she can get into your mind, the connection will allow you to see into her thoughts too." "But I don't know how to do such things," said Rebecca. "And what does all this have to do with my Joey?" I turned on the message from my phone and played it for everyone. "It doesn't look like a woman," Evie said. "He sounds like one of those fake voodoo priests New Orleans is full of. Whoever he is, he's holding Joey. I think he's working together with this entity," I said. "It's obvious they took Joey to use him as leverage against Rebecca. So no harm will come to him. Why risk your best trump card? I will do whatever it takes to save my Joey, Rebecca said. Just don't let me sleep with anyone this time, okay? Bridget, it's time to take the bodies, said a voice in my head. The binding ceremony must be performed on the night of the solstice. Bodies? I asked. Do we need more than one? The pause before answering told me everything I needed to know. I may have been a novice in the occult sciences, but I outwitted the men who thought I was stupid 300 years ago. This is perhaps one of the reasons I was hanged for witchcraft. Men couldn't stand the fact that a woman was superior to them in business. When they couldn't get me to marry one of them so they could then buy or steal my property and assets, I was accused of witchcraft. It had nothing to do with religion, just money and greed. I think humiliation and revenge for outdoing several local elites in business deals was also a motive. These gray-haired old men could not tolerate defeat, especially from a woman. They couldn't then, and they can't now. When I get my strength and a new body back, I will find the descendants of all these old people and kill every one of them. I will also destroy all their bones and take their souls. You only need one body, but a spare wouldn't hurt either. What will happen if the time comes and you cannot expel the woman's soul from this body? After all, she is a very powerful witch. To hold back all your new power, if you cannot get this body, the second one will also be useful, although not as durable, and it will help bind your vampire servant to you. I still didn't trust the voice, but I did believe some of what it said. Papa Chalu would love the opportunity to hunt a nun. Mason and I had just started to rise when the moon rose high in the sky. It wasn't a full moon yet, but it would be just in time for the kids to go trick-or-treating in a couple of nights. I went out onto the roof of my building to enjoy a rare free evening. I looked down at the people in the surrounding area. Some were relaxing on the porch, while others, both locals and tourists who had decided to go beyond the usual routes in New Orleans, hurried about their business. I don't know how long I watched, but quite a long time must have passed, because the cigar I lit was almost burnt out and would soon have burned my lips if it hadn't happened. My phone vibrated nearby, and I reached for it. Judging by the fact that it was already completely dark on the street, a lot of time had passed. I shook my head, wondering how someone like me could have gotten hooked by someone like her. For a long time, I considered myself doomed, damned, and disgusting, as one song says. I wondered if I was too lost to be saved, but somehow, in her eyes, in her arms, and Lord in her heart, I found my salvation. Piti, I asked Mason. This is Patience. We need your help. I heard the sounds of running and heavy breathing. Then there was silence. Mason Beaumont, hurry up! And silence again. Without thinking, I ran out of the apartment and jumped on my bike. The drive to Beaumont, Texas, usually took about 4 hours. On my bike, I could do it in 3, but judging by Patience's voice, I doubted I would make it. I grabbed the phone again as I got onto the freeway and dialed the number with one hand while continuing to drive at full speed. I called an old friend who flew smuggling flights for traffickers. It took me 20 minutes to get to his small private airstrip and another 20 seconds to negotiate the price. He asked for $10,000 for a flight that would have cost me no more than $2,200 on a regular plane. I agreed, and 25 minutes after receiving the call, we were already heading to the plane. As soon as we landed, I lowered the bike down the ramp and sped off into the night. I didn't know where to go or where to look. I tried calling Pat again. Mason, we're hiding. Are you going? We were surrounded. We hid in a church on the east side of town. Patience, I'm already in town, I said quietly. I need directions. HHH, she replied. I was so quiet that I held my breath. There are so many of them, she whispered. She gave me the directions, and I ran them through Google Maps. 10 minutes later, I was there, and I was furious. I saw a church, but it looked abandoned and was burning. I knew that vampires wouldn't go near the fire. I saw several large furry creatures that resembled overgrown dogs standing on 2 legs. I rushed toward the church, my bike roaring, letting them know I was coming. I kicked one of the furry monsters as I drove by, then jumped off the bike and ran as close to the burning church as I could. All my instincts screamed at me to run away from the flames, but I had to find Patience. One of the huge furry creatures jumped at me. I fought back. I saw 2 figures emerging from the darkness near the church. The larger figure was Patience, and she was in terrible shape. She was trying to carry another person. I grabbed the unconscious Patience from her arms. "Where is Pity?" I asked sharply. "He took her," she answered, barely audible. "You'll tell us everything on the road?" I said. "Now the main thing is distance. We won't all fit on your bike." She nodded. It was clear from her eyes that Patience could barely stand. She knelt down, and I placed Patience next to her. I walked to the nearest car I could find. It was an SUV, a big one. I used my strength to break the lock on the door, then put Patience in the back seat and lifted the other Patience into the front seat. I broke the ignition switch and started the car. Behind me, I heard a howl as the engine began to hum. I stepped on the gas pedal as two large furry figures emerged from the darkness ahead of us. Without thinking, I shot them down and sped into the night. For the first few miles, I was sure we were being followed, but when I got on the freeway, I realized we had pulled ahead. I headed back to the runway. The plane was still there. I quickly carried Patience on board, then returned to pick up Pat, who complained about being touched the whole way. After I agreed to another exorbitant price, the plane took off again. I knew I would feel better when they were on my territory. Let the one who started all this crap try to confront me on my land. Patience slept the entire flight. Patience woke up several times and looked around, but it was clear that she was barely holding on. When we landed, I called a taxi and drove to one of my apartments near the French Quarter. I tucked Patience into bed and called the nurse I was working with to check on them. She looked at me, and for the first time, she was speechless. "Patience, wake up," I said sharply. "You are stronger than this. Where's Pity? What happened?" "We received a message about another werewolf," she began slowly. "We didn't take it seriously. Pity didn't tell you because she wanted to surprise you. We were only 300 miles from you, and she was going to stop by to see you. We went to the church as usual to begin our investigation." She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much death. "There were real werewolves there, Mason. They changed right in front of us, and it wasn't just one. There were 7 or 8 of them, and there were vampires with them. You know how difficult it is to deal with one vampire, and there were 3 of them. And Mason, I don't know how, but they entered the church. One of the vampires was so old and strong that he didn't burst into flames when he walked inside. He set fire to the church himself. Everyone who was inside died. We didn't stand a chance. We were cut off and surrounded, so we were forced to fight. The old vampire offered us a deal. He swore it would be a fair fight, 3 against him. If we win, they will let us go." Mason, it seemed like he knew in advance what we would do. He just looked at us and smiled. Then, looking at Pity, he suddenly became angry. "Mason," he spoke, "she, like you, is a sentient vampire, but filled with evil." He picked up Pity and looked into her face, then turned to us again. "What's going on here?" he asked. "I knew something was wrong when I watched you in New Orleans. It's not her. It's some kind of clone or something like that. If you want her back, if she is dear to you, bring me the real one to the place where you first killed one of my descendants." Then he left, taking Pity with him. He picked up Patience's phone before leaving. We tried to follow him, Mason, but because of this, werewolves attacked us. I'm not sure if he controls them, but they clearly wanted to kill us. What place was he talking about? "Where is it?" I asked. "The only other vampire we've ever met as powerful as this one was a couple of years ago in Chicago. After that incident, our original 3rd team member resigned, and Pity took her place. Pat sort of modeled herself after Prudence, so from afar, it's not hard to see why this vampire might think they were the same person." I got up and made some calls. The sun began to rise. "You can use everything in this apartment," I said. "There is food and drinks in the refrigerator, and there's more than enough money here to get you back to your headquarters. The phones work too. The sun will rise in an hour. It's autumn now, so it will get dark quickly. Tomorrow night, as soon as the sun goes down, I'm heading to Chicago. Mason, you are alone. You will die. Wait while we contact headquarters. We'll sort it out. Mason, you are alone. You will die." Patience said, "Wait while we contact headquarters. We'll decide everything. You got us out of this mess. And although you're a man and a vampire, I think you're still not bad. I don't want you to die," she added. "Patience, I was dead long before you were born," I answered. "But without Pity in my life, I will be truly dead. Without her, I'll still die. I have no choice. Then pick me up when you go, she said. I nodded and returned to my real home. I was lost in thought, wondering how I had even gotten involved in this matter. At first, it seemed like such a routine divorce case, but now I began to question things I hadn't thought about for many years. I smiled, realizing that Chris was next to me as always, holding my hand. It spoke volumes about how close and comfortable we were with each other. I looked around the room and noticed that everywhere I looked, there was red hair. My Aunt Angela, whom I loved even though she sometimes scared me, was giving a lecture to Rebecca. Savannah stood nearby, absorbing everything her aunt was trying to teach her. Savannah and I always got along well. Unlike the others, she was more of a listener than a talker. She was also much more cunning than people thought. I wondered why Savannah was even here, and then I realized that she was here for one simple reason: her family. Savannah felt there was enough truth in this for her to take action and make sure her husband, Greg, and children were safe. Savannah always did only what she wanted, so in that regard, she was just like the rest of us. But she became decisive and purposeful only when it came to Greg. I remember the first time I received notice that my cousin was getting married. I didn't want to go south, but after hearing Angela's story about Savannah getting married, I knew I had to see it with my own eyes. I imagined she would live in some dilapidated house like the ones I saw when I visited her in the summer as a child. How surprised I was when it turned out that Savannah lived in a complex that included several houses and industrial enterprises. The main house was a beautiful old Annabella mansion, completely restored and modernized. When Chris, my husband, a huge football fan, saw Savannah's fiancé, he almost went crazy. "It's Greg Gates," he shouted. "Greg Gates at your wedding?" "Of course, he's here." Savannah grinned. I'd known her all my life and had never seen her like this. She literally glowed. "Do you want to meet him?" she asked. Chris, my usually calm husband, stood there nodding like one of those toy dogs on a dashboard. Savannah beckoned Greg with her finger, and he immediately apologized to the people he was talking to and headed toward us. The closer he got, the bigger he seemed. He was tall, powerful, with caramel skin that contrasted sharply with the pale skin of the little girl he carried in his arms. Despite his impressive appearance, he was very modest when Chris started bombarding him with questions about his football career. Greg politely answered every question. When Chris said, "You know, Savannah is my cousin," Greg nodded quietly. "Well, sort of like marriage, but that also counts, right?" Chris continued. "Of course," Greg answered softly. "So, how did Savannah convince you to come to her wedding?" Chris asked. "She's kind of marrying me," Greg answered with a quiet smile. Chris froze for a moment and then exploded with delight. Greg, clearly concerned about the safety of the child in his arms, instinctively turned around, shielding the girl from my husband, who probably looked a little crazy. I think Greg expected, as happens in the South, that Chris might not approve of a union between a white woman and a black man. "Oh, God!" Chris shouted to the whole hall. "Greg Gates is my cousin." He rushed around the hall, explaining this to everyone who would listen. "He's a nice guy," Greg said, laughing. "Fairy." I smiled a little, excitable, Savannah added. "Fairy." I smiled again, as I pushed the memory to the back of my mind. I noticed Evie sitting relaxed in the corner with her legs up. She was talking on the phone and listening to music at the same time. We had strict rules. Don't call anyone until this was all over. But it looked like Evie had already called her husband, Chance. Evie had always had problems with rules. Meanwhile, it was getting dark outside, but I knew we still had enough time with Rebecca. It usually started around midnight. I decided to rest a little when, suddenly, real chaos began. Rebecca suddenly stood up and walked toward the door. Angela tried to stop her, but then remembered what the plan was. I looked at Rebecca. The shy, introverted woman I knew was gone. Her face became like a mask, passive, devoid of any human emotions. And there was something else in my head, in the back of my mind. I began to hear a voice calling me. It was as if it wanted to take something from me that I was sure I didn't have. It was the same voice that had screamed at me last night, but this time it tried to seduce me. Angela pressed her hand to her head. I realized that the voice was talking to her too. A quick glance at my cousin showed that they, too, heard this voice. It was soft, soothing, almost mesmerizing. But then I felt Chris squeeze my hand, and I realized what I could lose if I gave in. I stopped listening to the voice and simply drowned it out in my mind. At that moment, I finally understood. Regardless of whether I believe it or not, it was real and happening right now. To be continued. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. She will be there very soon. The link to the sequel will be in the description below. Subscribe to our channel so your love doesn't cheat on you. And go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story